Hey guys, what's up? This is Evan from Stock Music Musician, and today I've got a review and a user guide for one of my favorite new plugins. It's called Sketch Cassette 2, and it is by Aberrant DSP. And this thing, let's take a quick look, basically simulates many different versions of recording to a cassette tape, from high quality 8-track or maybe 4-track tape recorders to some very cheap portable little cassette recorders with cheap tapes in them, and then it's got a bunch of cool effects that you can add to it. This thing is one of those rare plugins that's just like a magic sound gooderizer. You put it on and certain things just pop and sound amazing. It also has some really cool effects and does some great tonal coloring. Before I actually play some demos of it for you and show you how you can use it to tweak your tracks and also kind of teach you how to use it though, I want to invite you to leave any comments below about whether or not you would use a cassette tape or vintage like emulation like this, or if you prefer to just go clean and modern. And also I'd like to know if you ever actually recorded with tape back in the day. I recall having a Tascam 424 4-track recorder. I loved it. It was a ton of fun. I wonder where it went. I don't know. My parents must have lost it at some point. I wish I had it. All right, let's watch that intro. So the first thing I want to do is play for you the Sketch Cassette. Here's one, basically a mix with Sketch Cassette and a mix without. On the mix without, which is what we'll hear first, I have no Sketch Cassette and no other processing basically except for limiting. On the mix with Sketch Cassette, no processing but Sketch Cassette, but I've included it on most channels and on the master bus. So let's listen. Remember, the first one you'll hear is no Sketch Cassette, then you'll hear it with Sketch Cassette, boom, boom, boom. So there you have it. I think those results are pretty convincing for like this garage rock sound. You've got these beautiful blown out like drums where you can hear just the crash cymbals basically, just overly crushing the drums or being crushed by the tape in this beautifully distorted, saturated way that sounds loud and present without being harsh. Same with the kick drum, it's just like booming and exploding. The guitars have more body and edge. And a crazy thing, which I'll show you some about later, is that it's actually, even though it feels louder, it is actually quieter and has lower peaks than the unprocessed version. I've not added any EQ or compression here. This is just all tone shaping via the Sketch Cassette. So once I actually go and clean it up, I think it'll sound even better. Let's take one more quick listen, again with and without, and really listen for how blown out and beautiful the high end and the low end sound, and just how much fuller it sounds. Okay. If you want to pick up Sketch Cassette, and I'd highly recommend that you do because it costs, at press time it costs about $30. I've got an affiliate link down below. You can go grab it, pick it up. It is really revolutionary because it can transform your sounds so easily and bring that vintage vibe, or you can do something more subtle. One note of warning though, if you use Reason, you cannot use Sketch Cassette in Reason 11 or below because Sketch Cassette is a VST3 plugin and Reason only can host VST2 plugins. So, Reason folks, I'm sorry. Hopefully this is something that, Reason 12 will resolve. All right, now let's actually kind of look at what Sketch Cassette is doing on the master bus here. Well, actually, go over to here, open an instance of it. And I just want to say, I love the interface. The look of this is so fun and cool. It's got like character. Every time you change the style of tape or the style of a machine, it really kind of it looks different. It's fun. It's well designed. But I just want to show you some of the sound that we're getting from it. So you can hear how it's just sort of making everything beautiful and fun and blown out. I want to show you now some more demos about how you can use it for tone shaping, and then then I'll show you like exactly how it works. So first thing I want to highlight is the drums here. As I already mentioned, the thing I really want to highlight is just how blown out and beautiful the drums sound. Normal. And so the way I'm doing it is basically by using like an average quality tape machine, using an average quality tape, and then boosting the saturation, making it slightly aged, and then adding some of this noise reduction compensation back in parallel. It's also only at 52. This is a wet dry knob, so it's not fully blended in. It's I guess I had it at about 66%, which you would think that would be 50% up here, but hey, it sounds good to me, which is all that matters. No wow or flutter on the drums, but I just want to show you a little bit how different it would sound if I messed around with this. Like at the highest quality, it doesn't blow out as much. And at the lowest quality, the world's smallest, cheapest drums. But you can already start to see how just by choosing what type of tape you're using and what type of tape machine you're using, you can craft your tone exquisitely. And then they all saturate slightly differently, and they all age a little differently, and they all sort of just add that tape compression in a different way. Each different style of tape and playback. So now I want to show you a couple of these guitars and what I'm doing on them. So let's solo this guy. This is what he sounded like without it. And with. So to me, that sounds like you just get a little more hair of the dog and a little more saturation, but again, without being harsh. And we've used a fair amount of saturation. I've kind of pumped up the input a little bit just to trigger some more tapiness. And I've made it like a worn old tape to ride off some of that. Now there's I double tracked this guitar. So let's see what I'm doing there. And this was all recorded with a Les Paul Direct. So here I'm using a fancier tape Type 4, which is the best, in standard mode. Very little, it's not old, and so we'll hear how this kind of kicks in. Off and then on. So to me that adds a little more edge, a little more bite without being overwhelming. And these two together now. And it allows me to get a little bit of a complementary, even more of a complementary sound, even though those are both the same Les Paul being played through. I don't think I have it on the big chords. Oh, I guess I did. Okay, so let's see what's going on here. This is just a super high quality tape, but brightened up with the noise compensation, little saturation. And I think I'm using this more for the fatness of the tape and the compression from it. So let's try it on and off. you hear how it just becomes fatter and a little more sustained as opposed to soloed. I'm probably doing the exact opposite thing on its complementary guitar. No, I'm doing the same thing on that one, but I've added a little bit of wow and flutter to just give it more movement, similarly with the dropouts, but we'll get into the interface in a second. So no movement, and then once we turn it on, just that little bit of fluttery movement for these long drawn out chords really helps in the context of the track. And let's also look at the bass, and then there's one more thing I want to show you in terms of demos, and then we'll take a listen to see how it actually works. Using a pretty high quality bass here, tape here. Driving the input just a little bit, and actually getting a little wow and flutter. Putting a lot of this bright parallel compression in, and a fair amount of saturation. And let's see just what it would sound like in a few different modes. Just growly. Well, let's turn it off first so you can actually hear it. A decent sound, but so, this is certainly, I think it's a fantastic sounding plugin. I've probably overused it on this track a little bit. And it's certainly something that you could really overuse and use in the wrong way, but I think it sounds great the way I've used it here. Especially I know once I start adding some EQ and compression, cleaning stuff up. So here's one other instance where I used it to bring this lead guitar to life by just really going, we're adding a fair amount of saturation and lo-fi-ness, but we're also really fluttering it and having a lot of dropouts. So this is what it sounded like originally. So that is just adding so much character and interest to a sound that maybe, was fine, but it didn't really pop out. So right? We are clipping the master bus. So let's just put a limiter on that guy. So that is the basics of this wonderful, fun plugin. But now I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the features on it and how to use it. So let's just open up the one that's on the master bus so that we can really hear everything going on. So on the far left, as you've already probably grasped, we have the 3 types of tape players and the 4 types of tape. You can combine them any way you want. If I was a mathematician, I could say there were X number of permutations, but maybe 27, maybe not. I don't know. You can also bypass the tape mode completely and just have it doing the wow and flutter and other stuff. As you heard a little bit, each one of these tapes really truly does sound different both on its own, and it also saturates differently, it ages differently, and it compresses differently. On the far right, you've got a wet dry knob, so let's make it all the way wet so we can kind of hear what these changes sound like. my personal go-to for most of the stuff would be type 2 or type 4 with standard, unless you're going for a really conceived effect. Then, of course, you have tape age, and you can make anything sound really worn out. Adding some hiss. Saturation. Remind you of high school at all? Or maybe before? You also have 2 saturation modes here. The input and the output, and depending on how hot you hit it, really will depend on where it saturates and where like tape compression comes into play. Next, you have wow and flutter, which is basically the way, a tape kind of speeds up and slows down a little bit over time, the way it, just doesn't quite keep the pitch or the tempo. And so this controls how deep the wow and the flutter are, and this controls how fast. You can also choose to sync tempo, and then the waveform itself. Subtle amounts can be quite useful. You can also turn on flanging. And you can do frequency modulation by clicking this, so that this now is the modifier for the flutter depth, or maybe the flutter rate, I guess. But we'll turn those off, and then you can offset the flanger and the phaser as well. Another common thing you will recall perhaps from back in the day when we used to listen to music on tape is that over time they would sort of break up and blow up, almost like you would lose sound. And so you can add these dropouts, both the depth and their intensity, how much they drop out and how frequently. And you can have it just applied equally mono-wise, or you can have it be like stereo independent, which is almost a tremolo type thing. And finally, you have here this noise reduction compensation, which is, my understanding is that in order to reduce the noise of tape, they'd like shave off some of the frequencies, but then they'd also artificially re-inject frequencies on top of that to make it sound like you're not losing as much of that top end. And this is really kind of where this plugin can shine or make or break. It's really easy to overly have this hyped up high end, which I think this song maybe has shifted a little in that way, but when done right, this can make it sound lively and kind of shift the frequency spectrum in a way that an EQ just wouldn't. So this is whether you turn it on or off, how bright or where the brightness, what frequencies it is, and how much. And this is a parallel sort of compression where you're actually blending it in. So let's try it with and without. And with on, and then we'll blend it in. So there you have it, the Sketch Cassette 2 in a nutshell. I think this is one of those unique and wonderful plugins that sounds really good on a lot of different sound sources. I think even on hip-hop tracks, you can either go the lo-fi route with some of your leads or throw this on like a kick buzz and it'll sound insane, just blown out. For any sort of retro stuff, I think on a lot of synth parts, this would add life to it. It might be too extreme for a lot of master buses. The only real downside to this is that, as far as I can tell, it seems to introduce a lot of latency that even my DAW's latency compensation doesn't overcome. Like, I tried to use it as a send effect and to parallel process it, and it just really was pretty delayed and didn't sound great. I also tried overdubbing a few tracks after I had several instances of Sketch Cassette on this, and similarly, there was a lot of latency there. So this was recently released, and I hope this is just a thing that needs to be sort of patched. It doesn't seem to use a ton of processing power, so my hope is that this can be fixed. Nonetheless, I totally recommend it. Just put it on at the mixing stage and use its built-in wet-dry effects to blend in the signal you want. So, like I said, if you're not using Reason, you should absolutely check this out. There's a link down below to get your purchase under $30. I think this really is a transformative plugin for so many of us, getting some of those sounds that would be really hard to make otherwise. And, if you have any questions about how to use it, just leave them below. I wish you well. Thank you so much for watching. And as always, be sure to like and subscribe.